So, philosophers.
Fauxlosophers.
Indeed. All right, ladies and gentlemen, today's topic is the impact of internet on society.
Which internet are we talking about?
Well, you see, David, Webster's dictionary defines the internet, the strict definition of what an internet is, I should say, as an electronic communications network that connects computer networks and organizational computer facilities around the world. Now, what we, I guess, mean when someone says, have you been on the internet? They don't say, oh, have you been on the collection of computers that are networked around the world? They may mean that, but that's not, I guess, the more forward meaning. I guess the more forward meaning is the web, or the World Wide Web, as it's no longer referred to in common parlance.
Yeah, it seems that the term the internet is only ever used technically when discussing protocols or legacy software.
Yeah.
When most people say, I saw this on the internet, they implicitly mean the web.
Right. And the web is more or less the information space that's contained within the physical internet, which is made up of documents, web resources, all defined by URLs and hypertext links, and more commonly, I guess, websites and those websites' content. When someone says, I saw something on the internet, usually you'll ask them, well, where did you see it? And they're not going to tell you an IP node or anything like that. They're going to tell you, I saw it on Reddit or 4chan or whatever other site. I'm afraid we'll be copyrighted if I say. But that's, I guess, what we mean by the internet. The internet being the computer networked marketplace of ideas in a way. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a marketplace of ideas. It could literally just be a marketplace of whatever.
Complete nonsense.
Complete nonsense. Physical products, non-physical products, so literally anything. In a way, the internet, I think, is just a perfect reflection of the sum total of its user base. I was going to say humanity, but that's not entirely accurate. It's
mostly accurate, though.
It's getting more and more. I think the larger percentage of the world's population that actually uses the internet, the more true I think that will be. But there are still significant segments of the world population that aren't connected yet, but they're quickly dwindling. And most big tech companies, their goal is to bring everyone into the web space and make them a participant in the internet. So I guess that's what we would define the internet as. And I think that's a pretty succinct definition.
Yeah, I think so. I think that covers what most people think of when they think about the internet.
Sure. Now, one thing we didn't necessarily bullet point down, but have yet to define is, what do we mean when we say society?
Ooh, that's a good one. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. Because, we know what the internet is, but if we're trying to ask ourselves, how it interfaces with society, it's like, okay, well, we know what the internet is, know what is society. And I feel like, giving technical definitions, the technical definition being the aggregate of people living together in more or less ordered community, that obviously is subject to scope.
I think really what we're asking when we ask about the internet's impact on society, aren't we really asking the internet's impact on today's culture?
I think that also, I do think that would be a more accurate definition of what we're really trying to say. And
of course, culture affects society.
Right. Or maybe you could say as a component of a society.
Sure.
Because I don't think you can...
You don't really have a society without a culture.
Right. I think the culture is what could be described in some way as the ordered manner of a group of people, or at least it's one of the ordering factors to a group of people.
Right.
But I think when you and I say the impact of the internet on society, and even if we mean the impact of internet on culture, we're really talking about, I would say, Western culture specifically.
I suppose so.
Or
because I can't speak for Eastern culture because I don't speak any of those languages, and so I only get out of it what reporters might tell about it, and that's about it. And we can be certain that that's not a clear picture.
Sure. And when I say Western culture, I don't necessarily mean the monolithic philosophical structure that people would say is Western culture. I just mean, I imagine anybody listening to this within maybe the continental United States, well, not continental, just the United States, Europe, most people that are frequent users of the internet or have consumed most things of the internet would be subject to this as well, because or I guess you could say the society would be the societies and cultures of the people who use the internet, more accurately. So I guess for our experience, it would be Americans, or maybe people of similar cultures and spaces like that, and that tradition, I guess.
I guess maybe, but I mean, Europeans are pretty close too.
Yeah, I would be okay with including them as well, like Europeans and Americans. And however, while I do think some of the things we talk about could be loosely applied to all cultures, perhaps, I think if we were to be as specific, it would be about Western culture. So just to be clear, so if anyone listening to this is, from an Eastern culture or an African culture, and they don't understand or they disagree with what we have to say, maybe, just keep in mind that we are kind of talking about Western culture, because that's the culture in which we conduct ourselves daily, and we're kind of speaking from our experiences and what we absorb, from the culture around us, from news and observations. So if we don't get news or cannot observe from your culture's perspective, then I think it would be totally remiss of us to try to make that assumption for now, anyway. And then, overarching view, just humanity in general, but if we were to get specific and talk about specific societies, it would be about the Western society. So I just think it would be good to make that distinction, just so that, we do have a habit of being really specific until we're not, I think.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I think we're going to begin. We've listed out several subtopics. Start with the, off the cuff anyway, negative impacts that are easily observed as negative, and we'll work through them to verify that, or at least clear of our assertion they're negative.
Right.
Then the positive ones that are pretty clearly positive, and then assert our way through that. And then go through some of the unsureties, which really don't come out obvious either way as positive or negative. So, and then we'll wrap up with some conclusions. I'll maybe offering some suggestions, or who knows.
Mm-hmm.
So, first negative impact, the shortening of attention spans.
Yes. So this is a scientific conclusion that for one reason or another, exposure to the web, or at least the popular web, say social media such as YouTube, or I'm not sure the level of impact that Facebook might have on it, but I'm sure there's some contribution there. They have measurably shortened the modern person's attention span, because we get more and more used to instant gratification. And so since we're conditioned to have instant gratification, as soon as something is not fully satisfying, we move on to the next thing, and we won't give it a chance to finish. It doesn't uniformly affect everybody and everything. The existence of podcasts is one such counterexample. People obviously have the capacity to listen to long-form discussion and things like that, but it's getting more difficult, and I may need to review which age groups are the most affected as well, because that's another important factor.
Would you maybe ponder a guess at what age groups you would think would be more affected?
Well, my intuition would tell me younger age groups, because they are more susceptible to such influences when the mind is still developing, and you're forming your expectations of the world, then that's the time when you're most vulnerable to something like that affecting your expectations of, well, just how quickly should I be pleased with something?
I would tend to agree. To go a little further and maybe expand on it a little bit, attention spans in the scientific sense are one thing. And I think one of the biggest drivers to contribute to that is the method by which advertisement works through the internet or the web. Not just those things, but the fact that it is a vehicle for advertisement, and most of the time, advertisements operate on a very similar principle to most business propositions, which is it's essentially an elevator pitch, in a lot of ways. I've got to get to you in the quickest way possible the point and why you should consume this service, buy this thing, or persuade you to do certain things, because if you can boil it down to a small message, it's easy to be looped in a person's head, and the more times you can expose them to the same message over the course of a day, like how many times have you been trolling through the web and see the same ad multiple times and it looped quickly? Like YouTube, back before I no longer had to see ads on YouTube, was like that. You'd see the same handful of ads all day, between every video, the beginning of every video, and they're short, some not quite as short as some of the things, mediums you come across the internet, but minute tops in a lot of ways.
Oh, sure. Well, and a lot of them will try their best to get the whole point across within the first 5 seconds, after which you normally could skip the ad.
Exactly. And as well, I also want to kind of say, I don't know what you call this, but to expand on attention spans worsening. It's not just attention spans, I don't think. It's, how do I put this? Okay, because you are given access to so much on the web, like you can feasibly look through the vast sum of human knowledge and learn or read or see just about anything you want at any time, right? Now, this can create, I feel, a type of urgency, in a way, too, where you don't want to waste time, because imagine, back beforehand, if you had one book in your home and that was that's it, you can take your time absorbing that one piece, but there's, any little flick of an idea that comes into your head, and humans tend to, I feel, be bad at focusing in general, at times anyway. But whenever you have just an offshoot idea or a tangent, well, the internet can let you chase that tangent. And how many times have you started out on a YouTube video and before you knew it, you ended up on some website you've never heard of before through the weirdest chain of, similar things, or Wikipedia is a good example. People who will go on a Wikipedia article to read something and they'll see a word they don't understand, they'll click the hyperlink. Now you're in a completely different context, and you can go down that rabbit hole real quick.
I think that you have either accidentally or on purpose actually shifted the motivation that you're trying to explain. Because at first you said, well, there's a sense of urgency because you see a lot of information, and I was about to follow up with that would be a good way to rationalize it if you were going to try to rationalize having a short attention span. But realistically, it's because you become distracted by another thought, and the ability to immediately pursue it allows you to, that's a tautology. The ability to immediately pursue it is very tempting, and it is very easy to follow it, and so then you end up not paying attention to any one topic for very long because you're jumping between topics at your whim.
Sure. Yeah. I apologize. I let the thought train take me. I couldn't hold my attention on the original topic too long, I guess. So, but yeah, that's kind of what I mean. And I could point to a real world application I feel that is a consequence. I don't know if you could exactly ascribe this to the internet. I definitely think it's exacerbated this phenomenon or this occurrence. But I would like to pose it as an example. The example being whenever whenever you attempt to organize an event that contains more than just yourself as a participant with others. Now, one thing I've found that has gotten increasingly difficult as I've gotten older, and it may be, and I don't know if this is strictly because of the internet, but I've kind of rationalized it out this way, is when you set a plan, you lock down a commitment for a specific time and location, and it's reserved in your schedule, varying degrees, correct? Now, the one thing that the internet has allowed, and this is why I say may have exacerbated this, is you can find out about events that happen in the real world, making plans, things like that, in a moment. And I feel like, I don't know what it is, there's this human desire to not miss out and to maximize every moment you can with the most exciting and the most interesting thing there is, right? So I feel there's this fear that comes about when someone proposes, hey, a week from now, next Friday at this time, would you like to meet up for coffee and let's discuss something, or let's go see a movie? I feel there's this urge to be reluctant about making those plans, and I don't know, and it's because there's all this,
because who knows what else might happen during the time that you just committed to going to get coffee, which is kind of mundane.
Right, and then so that really much brings the choice down to which is more difficult, which is better, not making a plan or canceling a plan. And most people, I think, would agree that, if you just don't make the plan,
then you don't have to disappoint somebody.
Exactly.
There's a psychological thing there too.
Right. And so I feel like it's this focus on the next instant, like in the next instant, what's going to happen, and looking at things on that time scale, flying by the seat of your pants, or just not looking too far ahead because things could just be so dramatically different. It's dangerous to plan that far ahead because, and we've known this for a long time as a species, the farther out you plan, the less certainty you're going to have that your plan will come to fruition, right? Or things will be the same way. However, I feel like as times move forward, and I would assert that it's because of things like the internet, not so much for the internet's content, but for the interconnectivity it provides. You can make plans in a moment, whereas 50 years ago, when the average person did not have a mobile cell phone, 50 years ago? Is that accurate? Maybe
50 years ago. Mobile phones of any kind barely existed.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. So the average person, or the majority of people, vast majority of people, you can't say, let's just meet up right now, because unless you're already with that person,
Right, because they're probably out doing something else, and you can't get to them, and they probably don't even have an answering machine at home, so you can't even call them on the phone and leave them a message.
Exactly. So, I guess that's where I'm drawing from, and I feel like the focus on the now and the instant and trying to maximize that, I think is tied to the shortening of attention spans in a way, because the urge to cut your attention to look for something else, which is, I think, the ultimate breaking of your attention, and that's what your attention span is, well, why would you break focus on anything? And I think ultimately you don't know why you're breaking your focus until you do it, So that unknown being potentially of more value to you in an instant than your current activity is what leads to people breaking their attention spans very, quickly after very, very short periods of time, to always be on the radar looking for the next thing I could be doing, and not realizing that by breaking your attention span, you're sacrificing the actual moment for the potential of the next moment,
Right. So I think that we've spent enough time speculating about an explanation for the shorter attention span. We haven't really spent any time at all talking about why it's bad.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about why it's bad.
So I think probably the most important reason that it's bad is because most things that really matter and need to be considered take time to consider, and by comparison to flashing lights, are boring.
Yes. I agree. I very much so agree. I think some of the most important things inside it's due to their complexity in times, or
just, I mean, it's 5 seconds, or 6 seconds, or however short the attention span is, I think one of the biggest things one of the biggest areas in which you can see its negative impact is in a news cycle. Like the concept of a news cycle and how short news cycles have gotten is insane to me. How can we, I'm going to pick a recent event, not to go into it or make a decision, but, the United States and Saudi Arabia thing that's going on right now and revolving the death of a journalist, okay? That in and of itself gets just more and more complex the longer you look at it. However, I can flip through Reddit and in about 10 minutes already see opinions and form an opinion that I could probably be comfortable with if I weren't thinking too deeply into it.
And might even come to a conclusion.
Yes, that's the other thing. People, I think, do come to conclusions that quickly, or I've seen people come to conclusions that quickly, oh, I've heard this. They'll look at and rely on the sources that they trust implicitly, and then essentially export their thinking process to someone else that, this person says this about it. They probably studied it a lot. I'm taking them at their word for it, And while people have always kind of done that, pushed off the intellectual property onto someone else to let them deal with it, and then you just listen to the outcome. The desire to even consider verifying it for yourself, and the fact that takes time and is complicated, is just quashed more and more by the shortening of the attention span as well.
So here's another thing. I was learning about this just today, about a study on confirmation bias, in which the participants were asked which is a better firefighter, a more, conservative, tentative firefighter who doesn't, run face first into danger, and tries to be more calculated about his approach to eliminating the fire, or the stereotypical, gung-ho, break down doors and charge, right into the flames. Which one of those will be better? Now, the truth here is that these participants are in no position to actually know what the answer is to this. And so we should expect for rational people to say, I don't know. I don't actually know which one is better. However, because of cultural values, it's a little bit skewed. The answers were a little bit skewed in favor of the brave firefighter who charges into the flames. This makes sense because we glorify that stereotype in movies and television and things like that. So that's fine. Then the participants were shown an article called "Why Risky Firefighters Are Better." This was the title of the paper. And of course, I don't remember how much time they were given to read the paper, but it was made to look very thorough, as if this person really knew what they were talking about. Then immediately, almost everyone says, okay, the risky ones are better. Then the examiners tell the participants, well, actually, that study is completely bogus, and some idiot undergrad wrote that and made up all the data. And so then you should expect, well, now we're back to square one. We're exactly back where we started. We were shown a bit of what appeared to be evidence, and then now we've been given new information that says, well, that evidence is completely useless. So the results should go back to the way they were before, but they didn't. They only barely moved back toward the center. And this was done again for the reverse situation in which the conservative firefighter was said to be better, and it happened the exact same way. So our ability, our unwillingness to really look into sources of information, I think is largely influenced by our ever-shortening attention spans where, well, it's so easy to see a headline, form an opinion, move on, and now you've formed an opinion about something that you really still don't know anything about, but you'll be very prepared to argue against your friends and family about what the right conclusion is based on that, maybe having not even read the article. I think this sort of leads into another negative impact of the internet, which would be echo chambers, which are just fortifications of confirmation bias.
Right. And not only are they fortifications of confirmation bias, but I feel in a lot of ways echo chambers, I don't think echo chambers can exist. I don't think there can be one echo chamber. They are symbiotic. Or I can see where echo chambers form symbiotic relationships with other echo chambers as well, where the people who hold the common belief and then begin to participate in their echo chamber, you would think that by discussing something and reaching a consensus within the echo chamber would result in maybe more extreme ideas, but more, when people find resolution, they tend to be less heated about something, right? You come to a resolution, you calm down, you're satisfied. That's the word I'm looking for.
Right.
However, I feel so often that echo chambers tend to build totems of the symbiotic echo chamber. Let's take right and left as a simple example.
Okay.
People on extreme ends of both spectrums spend more time talking about the opposite end of the spectrum, or the symbiotic echo chamber, about which they hate. Like, they just don't agree with their ideas. They spend more time talking about the ideas they don't agree with, and then assuming the ideas, everyone that's a member here agrees with this, right? Because you assume the negative of something where, you think this is bad? No. Okay, good. Then you must think it's good. It's binary.
Right.
You just jump to the hard conclusions.
Black and white is easy.
It's very easy. So you would think that, we all agree that these are all black and white, set, done, good, go. There are people that agree with me out there. I feel confident in my position. The problem is, because of the internet, it opens you up to all sorts of things. You also have to exist in an echo chamber while realizing that there are people outside of your echo chamber, and they're forming around each other. You get what I'm saying?
Well, the thing is, you have echo chamber A and echo chamber B who believe opposite things, but then their way of acknowledging people outside the echo chamber is saying, look at this other echo chamber.
Right.
And it's even worse when there's not even any self-awareness about this. Look at them. They're all in an echo chamber. Those idiots.
Yes.
And then, of course, everyone now thinks, those idiots.
Yeah.
And they keep repeating it to each other, and hey, you're echoing about their echo chamber.
Right. And I feel the longer an echo chamber exists, the more consensus has to be enforced in the echo chamber.
This is what causes schisms. Is the echo chamber reaches a critical mass in which some subset disagrees about one thing.
But it's enough.
But it's an important thing enough for them to totally split, and now you have another one that is basically the same, but not.
Except for this one issue, Yeah. Or idea, whatever.
That's why there's so many different churches, too.
True. Schisms. A lot of great schisms throughout history. But
isn't there one called the Great Schism?
Yes, actually.
Yes.
That was I believe the schism. I'm not sure if it was the Eastern Orthodox Church from the Roman Catholic Church, or
I think that's it.
I think
sounds
so.
about right.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not a theologist or a Catholic historian or whatever. Sure. But yeah. Now, another thing we have on the negative impact list is toxic subcultures, which I find are not always necessarily echo chambers. However,
the thing about toxic subcultures is not really necessarily that they're repeating ideas to one another, but they're reinforcing negative and or antisocial behavior.
Okay.
Let's take. So there's a thing that I'm thinking of that most people won't know about, at the risk of sounding like a hipster. Joe, you know that I use a rather old software system called Internet Relay Chat.
Yes.
And now we're escaping from the web, but I'll tie it back.
Are we though?
Yes.
Okay.
Anyway, in which the people on this one particular Internet Relay Chat network, they all distrust one another for probably good reasons.
Historical reasons.
But the problem is that they take this attitude outside the network.
Oof.
And so, because I don't even connect to this network, but they connect to the network that I do connect to. And you can tell that they're from there by the way that they act about everything. Basically, their attitude becomes, well, I can't trust anyone, and this is all kind of a big joke. So I'll have a serious conversation when I want to. And if you try to engage them with a serious conversation, you can never tell whether they will want to participate in it or if they just feel like trolling you. And it might take you a long time to figure out what it is they're up to. That network is basically the 4chan of IRC.
Wow. Well, speaking of the 4chan of, well, the internet.
4chan.
4chan.
I was avoiding talking about 4chan myself because actually I'm going to confess. I've never visited 4chan.
You've never been on 4chan?
I've looked in from a telescope.
I would say that you couldn't call yourself a netizen if you hadn't. However, I feel Reddit has replaced 4chan as probably the deepest you should go if you still want to be considered a netizen, unless you want to get really, really real.
Well,
before going
and through
off the
things
grid.
like Reddit, you get the highlights of 4chan.
Yes, Reddit is afloat on the sinkhole of 4chan.
It's the cream of 4chan.
Yes.
You can scrape the cream off the top of 4chan and it goes to Reddit.
Now, I will say, well, talking about these toxic subcultures, they you know, like you said, like the people in IRC that bring it out of their subgroup, 4chan is notorious for doing that. You know, 4chan has gone into the real world and operated, I'm going to air quotes agents here, but members of the 4chan community go into the real world to stir up trouble. And I will say, I do peruse 4chan from time to time, and there is definitely, you definitely behave a lot differently on 4chan than you would on Reddit. And I don't necessarily mean that you engage in much worse things. I feel it's as though you have to adjust your expectations for how other people behave on 4chan. Like it's the id of the internet in a lot of ways. You will see anything that a person could conceive, or maybe not conceive, unless they had the idea brought to them by someone else. And I guess what we're talking about though is when it crosses into the subculture acting out in reality, because that's where society exists, contrary to popular belief. It is in the real world, not on the internet, as of right now anyway.
We haven't quite reached the singularity.
Not quite. We're getting there. But for instance, the whole incident of, though there's several stunts. The one that jumps to mind is the 4chan movement to have posters hung around college campuses saying it's okay to be white.
Ah, yes, I remember this campaign.
Now, yeah, this is a 4chan campaign. Like, this came directly from 4chan, and it's proven.
It didn't hopscotch through Reddit.
Nope,
first.
This jumped straight to the real world. Now, as most of the really notorious things that 4chan has done.
Well, of course, the stereotypical tech meddling and other tomfoolery, breaking into people's networks and things like that.
Sure.
Maybe not to actually be malicious, but for a joke, or maybe to actually be malicious,
or a malicious joke. The line gets really blurred depending on which page you go to on 4chan. But still, that the idea that was brought about, and 4chan talks about. I say 4chan like it's a single entity. The members,
yes, that infamous hacker 4chan.
I think you mean Anon.
I think I was quoting Fox News there, actually.
Oh, wow, that's bad. Well, the people of 4chan would say Anon, because that's who they identify as. Like, if you were to go pull
anyone from 4chan say, "Who are you?" And if they don't know who you are, they say, "Oh, I am Anon." Anon is the God figure in the middle of 4chan that is just the actual embodiment of 4chan and all of its members that's personified. So, and that's a running joke. You see it that surfaces to Reddit quite often, and memes like Anon finds a heart, Anon does this. But when they go into the real world, they do it for the lulz. That's the common reason given.
I was about to mention the lulz.
Doing it for the lulz.
We can't talk about 4chan without talking about lulz.
The lulz, man. And the whole point of the lulz is it's essentially just doing anything at another person's expense.
To amuse oneself.
To amuse anyone.
To be fair.
Literally, you don't even have to amuse yourself. Just amuse anybody. And now, the other thing to keep in mind about that, too, is that nothing is sacred on 4chan. That's the other thing, that 4chan relinquishes all sacredness. Now, there are subgroups within 4chan that may find, non-DRM software is
sacred. You know that one person in your family who just doesn't have a filter?
Yes.
4chan.
4chan is Anon, or 4chan is that person.
Yes, I should say Anon.
Yeah. Now, there are varying degrees of, things that they do hold sacred, but even then, all things are inferior to the lulz.
Well, I was going to say perhaps the only thing that they truly hold sacred is the lulz.
Right. And that's why when they act out in their worst fashion, it's against people who want to take the lulz away or quell the lulz.
Right.
Any type of censorship movement like that is automatically gone out. Now, what makes them toxic? I think that's what's important, because I myself have trolled for the lulz before, or the keks, or what have you. However, I wouldn't necessarily define myself as being a member of toxic subcultures, or I wouldn't necessarily define myself as a toxic individual, even if I do belong to certain subcultures which tend to be toxic. Like gamer culture tends to be very toxic, especially competitive gamer culture, and I feel like, now, what do we mean by toxic in those instances? I guess, could you say that toxic is exhibiting behavior that, if exhibited in a normal, normal, what the hell does that even mean? But in a real world sense?
Socially unacceptable. I used the term earlier, antisocial.
Okay,
That's really what I mean.
Yeah, I agree. Because on the internet, anonymity, I feel like, plays into that a lot. Just to tie back in what I was saying about 4chan, Anon, which is short for anonymous, being able to be truly anonymous, or at least in all practical senses anonymous, is a wonderful thing in a way, because it gives you the ultimate level of privacy while the ultimate level of freedom as well and expression. However, it does come with anytime people can operate anonymously, it brings problems into when you then group a bunch of anonymous people together.
Sure. Well, I mean, freedom begets responsibility, but there are many people who don't wish to take responsibility for anything.
Right. And if you're anonymous, you cannot be assigned responsibility. Or, you cannot be held accountable.
You can't be held accountable, that's right.
Exactly. So you did take it on merit at that time. So I think that's what really contributes to toxic behavior, is that, you can be anonymous. I think in the more minor sense, because, for instance, in gamer culture, people typically aren't fully anonymous. Especially
there is some way that you can find out who somebody is.
Sure. And look at people who stream on Twitch openly, show their face. I like to poke fun at the speedrunning community from time to time, because the types of individuals that do speedrun and also have rage problems, that's kind of toxic. Like, if a guy's sitting in his bedroom playing a game, trying to do a speedrun, he fails and he smashes his keyboard over his knee, that's his personal property. I don't care if he does that. Now, would I say that's a healthy way to express your aggression? I don't know. Not to say. But if you were in public and you break something over your knee, everyone's going to whip around and look at you like, okay, what's going on? We need context, or just violence has occurred, even if it's not against another person, right?
Right.
Or even violent expressions of language, which I
danger. I don't even want to begin to work out how violence and language work together. I will just say not abusive, abrupt and abrasive language.
Yeah.
Pull up any cringe compilation on YouTube, and you'll see it. They're there. But
I don't want to unpack the existence of cringe compilations right now.
Surely not. That deserves its whole episode. You just sit down and watch cringe comps. But
no. No.
Yeah, we'll probably get copy striked anyway. But so yeah, those behaviors, which we have maligned being a part of the toxic subcultures. And anonymity contributes, A, and B, I think you could even say that the echo chambers are part of it as well in a way. Maybe not so much as they're echoing back the same ideas, but they're forming a pseudo sense of normalcy and acceptability for what's okay in this culture. If you're exposed to it and you hear it back mimicked to you all the time, you kind of just get used to it, and the pot warms to that point where you're like, okay, this is acceptable. But then you log off the internet and you hard shift back to reality. Humans don't necessarily flip on and off like that. We're not binary. You can't just click your, focus off of that and go, okay, I'm in the real world now, I gotta behave like a real world person. We ramp up and down into things like that. So I think that's really where the damage, the potential damage of toxic subcultures comes into the real world. And that would lead us, I guess, talking about damage to the last thing we have listed as a negative impact, which is the psychological damage to children.
Yeah. This isn't... So the psychological damage to children as a result of the internet isn't fully the internet's fault. It's also a fault of parenting, I think.
I agree.
But it's sort of not, because, the parents of these children who are being harmed by exposure to certain things on the internet didn't grow up in a world in which that existed, at least in large part. And so they, in some ways, you can't hold it against them for not realizing just how bad it could get. But so I think this is a failure on the part of people in the know to tell parents, hey, watch out for your kids on the internet. I was warned about things on the internet growing up, but these were things like the stuff you'd see on the news, of really, really particularly bad cases,
Right.
Child abductions, things like that.
I hear about it in school all the time. Back when you had to go to a computer lab to learn about how to use computers.
Right. And so in that respect, I was sheltered a little bit, and so I in some ways, in some ways I feel this is justified. In other ways, the people sheltering me were justified, but I resented it a little bit, because there were some things that I was kept from that I later found out were really not bad.
Right.
And so then I formed the rest of my opinions about raising children on the internet based on the resentment, and thought, well, the internet's fine. It's, teach your kid not to give away their name and address, and you're probably okay. But that's not totally true. Well, and it's getting different now, because now the way that kids interact with the internet is not... I'm talking about little children who are really psychologically damaged by this stuff. They are not yet fully mentally ready to interact directly with other people yet, so they don't. They're not talking with people, which was previously the fear about the internet, is your kid will get talking to somebody and say something they shouldn't and then get into trouble. But now it's like, your kid is first exposed to technology because they see the flashing lights and they want to look at it, so you give them your phone, and then they want to do something with it. And so through some way or another they find, say, YouTube.
Right. Well, not only do they see flashing lights, but it's responsive immediately to, and so it's
It's
stimuli.
not just flashing lights, it's flashing lights they can mess with.
Yes, it's stimuli that then reacts to their stimuli, and in an endless loop.
Right.
And will do whatever they want, you know. It will do something
And
whenever
they
do
really
something.
have no idea what they're doing, but it's fun.
Yeah. It's basic human, you know, I get to do something, and I don't know anything else, so this is it.
Sure. But then this ends up, well, do we want to talk about like the dark side of children's YouTube? Do we want to talk about that?
I don't want to go too deep. I feel like that would require a lot of preparation and setup.
Yeah.
For my psychology, anyway. But long story short, regardless of what it is, it's. Let's just say that the people who there is no filter for really what can be on children's YouTube besides some really dumb arbitrary filters like language and air quotes violence. And when I say violence, I mean like no gore or anything like that, but
well, and kids being exposed to certain types of violence is fine. I mean, because like look at Tom and Jerry, a beloved classic.
Right.
Full of violence.
Three
It's
Stooges.
Non-stop violence. Yeah, Three Stooges, for sure. So violence is not necessarily bad to expose a child to.
In that way, but I think we said psychological damage, and I feel like this isn't just psychological damage. The method by which the damage is done is through a type of psychological... It would be psychologically damaging to me as an adult, I feel like, if I were to watch too much children's YouTube.
Yes.
Because it's nonsensical.
It's probably true. Maybe for different reasons, although the danger with children is that
more permanent.
Well, I'm not even talking about the damage itself. I'm talking about the reinforcement. Is that children? The reason why children's YouTube is the way that it is because it's been found out just what gets the clicks.
Yep.
And so kids have psychological reinforcement to continue. To the point where, you know, you might try to take the phone away from a child and they'll scream and not want to let it go. Even as they're being damaged by it, they don't want to give it up.
Right. No, I definitely agree. There's definitely, and it's not just children's YouTube, but that's, I think, the most popular outlet at this time. Because it's far too common in reality to see people give their, 3-year-old, buy a tablet for a 3-year-old. Like, not an iPad or anything, but one of these cheaper Android tablets that really is only good for two things, which is browsing the internet and reading a book, you know?
Well, I think really if we're talking about replacement technology to give your child something, honestly, I think this is where those pseudo tablets or those like fake laptops of the past have a place, where they feel like they're doing something, but it's totally harmless and probably educational.
Right. But back to talking about the internet for children in general. I feel like the other reason it's potentially psychologically damaging, let's move beyond small children then, because I feel like anything else we could say about young children would just be sound like a broken record until we dove into it more, and I really don't want to get too deep into it. But even up into adolescence, it's dangerous because it's potentially psychologically damaging, or just damaging in general, because when I use the internet, you do not see any other people on the internet. You might see a GIF, you might see a video of a person, but you don't see the other people you're interacting with directly unless you're on a live stream. And even then,
that's like a particular thing. That's not browsing the web. That's a thing that you've planned, basically like meeting up in person, but not.
Exactly. I would argue that a vast, vast majority of the people you interact with on the internet, you don't see. None of your natural human protective features, your fight or flight sense, your ability to read facial expressions, no matter how underdeveloped it is,
taken away from you.
It's stripped from you, and you are defenseless in a lot of ways.
You can't look at someone and tell if they're creepy.
Right. Or even look at them and see what they are, you know. People can assume to be anyone on the internet. Now,
on the internet, no one knows you're a dog.
Right. But when I use the internet, my first idea and perspective of the persons that I engage with are they're people like me, roughly my age,
from my location, and that's my gut go-to when I know is wrong. And I was trained in school, they tried to beat it into us that every person you could be talking to could be the worst person ever. Like, they could be the serial child molester, rapist, whatever, the worst type of criminal you can imagine. Think of everybody you meet on the internet, that's who you assume they are first. And you always hold that in the back of your head. Now, that's in its own way is somewhat unhealthy because that leads to a lot of paranoia. As
I prefer rules instead.
Yeah, I agree.
I guess if you are put in a position where you have to put it as concisely as possible, then I guess that's a way to do it. But
you have 5 minutes at the beginning of a computer class where they're pretty much just teaching you how to type. So
I don't know. I think just a rule of never tell someone your personal information, no matter how trustworthy they appear.
But what I'm trying to get at, though, besides the rules, like what occurs is the internet is an adult place. Put it that way. Adult things happen on the internet because the majority of the people who use the internet are adults. And even if it weren't, then the majority of the people who aren't adults who are using the internet are using it to get access to the adult things because they were told they can't. And
which is a whole different
thing. But you see teenagers engaging on the internet with adults in a very immature way, and because they tend to be more gullible and short-sighted and have poor decision-making or very rash decision-making, they can really easily get taken advantage of against a person who they think, how could anyone do that, or why would anyone do that? I've never experienced someone be like that in reality because I've not been around a whole bunch of strangers my whole life. And that's where I think the danger ends up at, is you see teenagers all the time getting baited by, whatever that show was, To Catch a Predator. Most of these people aren't kids, they're teenagers that actually have access to the internet and can talk, but they have that same initial gut response that I do, I feel like. The person to whom I'm speaking is just like me. They're my age, they say the same words I say. Hello, fellow kids. It's easy when it's just text, anyone can type like a teenager and make it come out and look somewhat believable.
Right.
Any netizen can, anyway, I think. Because there's a whole other thing is how people on the internet communicate is pretty different. But I think that's where a lot of the damage for, up into adolescence children gets to. And then when you become an adult, you're responsible for yourself. And if you get damaged on the internet because you're being dumb, it's like, well,
what are you going to do?
What are you going to do?
It's not our job to take care of you anymore.
Exactly. But children deserve special protections or should be taken into special consideration. So it's definitely one of the more major negative impacts. Maybe not as prominent as it's made out to be. I don't know the statistics, but it's probably one of the ones that are more commonly known because whenever something happens to a child, it's a much more shocking news story, and the word about that tends to spread more. Because we tend to be very protective of children anyway, and I feel like the problem that exists is that we want to be protective of children, but most people who right now have kids about that age, at least in our area, don't know the internet well enough to even know how to protect them, and so they either hard overcorrect one way, as in just don't give them the internet, or they don't understand at all, and they say, yeah, do whatever you want on the internet. I feel like this might be a problem that gets mitigated more as the people who are netizens have children, And when I say netizens, I mean people who are frequent, savvy users of the internet, So I think possibly, I don't know. I think we could go to great lengths about this in its own episode at some point.
Yeah.
But on the upside, we can finally move into the positive impacts. So, bad news first. First positive thing is the availability of information, by extension, the increased interest in answering questions. This, I think, is kind of one of the few things about the internet that at its conception was acknowledged. Like when the internet was first being pieced together and the concept of what the internet could be was first forming, whether you're talking on the hardware level in the 60s or on the web level in the 80s, which is when the web really started coming about, in the ability to just provide information just openly.
Right. Well, I mean, the whole point of making any computer network to begin with was to share information.
Right.
Making an internet was to just expand that. And then what developed into the internet is just the full embodiment of sharing information. That's what it's for. That is what the internet is for.
Right. And it does that almost too well, I think, in ways. There's so much.
We even brought that up when we were talking about shortening attention spans, is that it's there, so why not look at it now?
Right.
So it's fantastic how readily available information is. You want to know just how hot is the sun, because of course you do. Why not? Why would that question not occur to you? And you want to know, and guess what? You can. It's there.
You can know right now.
You can know
within a few seconds.
Within however long it takes you to type it, and depending on how good your connection speed is. But
right.
in a matter of seconds.
Right. And this is absolutely wonderful, because for strict facts anyway, this does kind of get confusing at a point when we'll get to the next positive impact that I would say there are some issues with, but anything you'd want to know. Like I remember when they wouldn't allow us to have phones in schools because you could just use them to look stuff up.
Yep.
And then I thought about it and I was like, well, isn't that the point? Like, why is that a bad thing? If I have an interest because of the topic being discussed in class, why can't I look that up? Which turns out most kids that were in my class at the time didn't give a shit about what was going on in class. They were using it as a distraction, but I was genuinely curious, and you can use it to keep yourself in step with the members of the class. But even in my own practical daily life,
or if the professor says a word you don't know, we'll just look it up. You don't have to interrupt the class; you can just do it. But
right, or flip through a book to figure it out, which takes way longer and
it's even more distracting to everyone else.
Exactly. And it also helps people make smart decisions in their daily life. Like, anytime I buy anything, for the most part, at a store, and it's something I don't normally buy and that I don't already know. If my wife sends me to buy something I've not bought before, I look it up on my phone and see what's a fair price. What can I expect to pay for this? And how do I know when I'm getting ripped? And is there a difference between the name brand and, I don't have to do like I did when I was a child and eat Planters cashews and then the Great Value cashews to figure out that cashews are one of those things that you buy the name brand because,
just better, yeah.
Right, but something else, I'm sure anyone will contend with me on this, but like certain off-brand sodas are just as good, if not better, than the name brands, whereas others aren't. Now I can just look it up, and see, or at least get an idea of what the people are saying to stop wasting as much time. And
check the reviews, man.
That's its own episode right there. What about the reviews of my reviews, bro? How do you know your reviews are good?
They were paid to write that review. Oh, goodness.
Were they, though?
They might have been.
Who knows? I'm going to review that fact. But yeah, just the availability of technology straight up is amazing. And I think and this is one that it literally is only as good as the person using it. The internet, and the whole internet's that way, but this is one of those things where I feel like it's mostly positive. It's a lot easier to get right than to get wrong, because fortunately there's a common agreement and standard as to where you go to find. Okay, if someone brings up a topic you've never heard of before, where do you go to look it up the first time? Wikipedia, my dude. Everyone uses Wikipedia. And as far as I've been able to tell, Wikipedia has not done a bad job of at least providing an overview of an event with a general accuracy. Like, I would never tell, and, they told us when I was in college, don't cite Wikipedia. Well, now you can cite Wikipedia, apparently, is what I'm hearing. But,
yeah, you can. Well, it probably depends a lot on the topic as well,
sure.
Because certain categories of Wikipedia are going to be better than others as far as their accuracy. Like, okay, mathematics. That's fantastic on Wikipedia.
Yep.
Because what's controversial about it? Nothing.
It's
so there's nothing for someone to screw up. And do you know how many nerds are in mathematics Wikipedia editing that stuff? Constantly. If someone gets something even a little bit wrong, they're going to fix it within 5 seconds and then tell that guy what an idiot he is.
Right. And that's great, And more than anything else, a majority of the time in your average everyday life, If you're having a discussion with somebody, you're not doing a term paper. You're not discussing the deepest implications of something. You just want to know what the hell you're talking about. If someone says Angkor Wat and you don't know what that is, 5 seconds on Wikipedia will give you a pretty good idea of what Angkor Wat is. Maybe not why it's important. And you can juxtapose that with the context of your discussion to learn more about it. It's essentially just an aid to allow people to have more informed conversations on a general level. And I think that's for the most common use. Don't get me wrong, you can use it to go a lot deeper than that, but just the ready availability. I don't have to keep the 26 book stack of encyclopedias in my backpack at all times. I need a brief overview of a topic. Boom. I can then have a conversation and learn more about it from the person across from me, and there you go. So, in the interest in answering questions was the subtopic to that.
Yeah. So what's great about information being available is that by getting answers to what questions you come up with on your own, like you would have without the internet, once you get those answers, now you have a realization that, oh, if I have a question, it can be answered, and then this encourages further questioning. If oh, I found out this. Well, what about this? Oh, well, what about this? Well, what about this? And it's all there, and you're asking more and more questions and learning more and more things, and it facilitates this.
Kind of like what we talked about earlier with the shortening of attention spans, where you can chase tangents down, but for a positive outcome, you want to learn more. The next one is the acceleration of technological advancement. I would start this by saying two things. First of all, when you say the acceleration of technological advancement, that makes me think of the demand for a better internet, the realistic demand of the population, and their willingness to fork over money in significant quantities to have more, and then the technologies that would had to be developed to cater to that and make that reality. Is that what you were kind of talking about?
No, I was talking about, I guess that still sort of follows the sharing of information. What I was going for is that, I would like to make this thing, which is basically a combination of these things. How do I do it? Oh, I go to the internet, and in 5 minutes I've already got direction as to how I'm going to do it, and then in 5 more minutes I can be ordering parts to put it all together.
See, what I was thinking of it is, when the internet was first, the infrastructure required to operate the modern internet in most of Europe and the United States, how quickly that infrastructure, most of the technology of which that infrastructure is constructed is brand new, developed for that purpose. The sheer size of the infrastructure itself and how much power, time, money it takes to operate is immense. It's absolutely immense. And however, I would argue that the physical construction of the internet is the greatest modern marvel. Everything else aside, except for maybe back to the power grid itself, which had some similarities. But the fact that you can be almost anywhere and pull out a device that can fit in your hand and send data at a blistering rate, just about anywhere, up
incomprehensibly
and down.
Fast. You can't even think about how fast that is.
Right. Cell phones. I would argue that the internet is what made cell phones what they are today. That's it, period. Your cell phone is no more than a portal to the internet that can also make phone calls. That's what it is.
Well, yeah, because without the internet, why do I care about my smartphone?
Right.
I wouldn't have one.
And the amount of power in the modern smartphone is several orders of magnitude, I would believe, greater than the amount of computing power it took to put a man on the moon.
Oh, well, yeah.
Yeah. One smartphone, And that
orders of magnitude more computing power than what was on the Apollo rockets.
Exactly. But we got from the Apollo rockets, which was bleeding edge technology for its time,
which is another thing. That's bleeding edge. NASA. There's one.
Yeah, that wasn't just, oh, look at this thing people were using in the 70s.
Yeah.
No.
To,
or, well, 60s, I guess.
Yeah, to the modern cell phone, less than, what is this? I guess about 60 years later, within a lifetime, gone from that to this. That is so difficult to comprehend. It's insane. You know, for me, being as old as I am, remembering dial-up internet to now, the games I played over the internet on dial-up then to the games I play now on my fiber connection, and I'm not old, like I'm still a young person, how quickly that changed is absolutely mind-blowing. And it's not
the fact that you even talk about in terms of how old things like that are, like when you might reminisce about dial-up, about like, oh, that was ancient. Those were the dark ages. It's like, it's when you were 5. Like,
yeah, that's when you were 5. That was like 20 years ago, and not even that for some people, depending on where you live, because it grew like an organism. It didn't just appear everywhere, you know. And I just can't even fathom. I don't think it'd be difficult to fathom just the sheer number of miles of cable that have been laid just for the internet. And that's not even counting the cable that we co-opted from things like cable television and telephone lines. So yeah, and then there's all the technology that goes in to support that. You know, cell phones being one of the largest ones, the advancements in portable technology and you know, connectivity speeds and things like that, all for and by the internet. And that I could go at great length as a techno-optimist, as a person with an electrical engineering background, just vomit out about it all day, vomit words and just blown away. That's a miracle. Having the modern internet the way it is now in just infrastructure alone, absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. So the last one we're going to talk about, which I will contend is maybe not as positive, I don't know, is the amplification of otherwise small voices, which is us, you know.
Yeah. For instance, ourselves. Yeah.
Right. Now, I know what you're thinking, you know, why would I contend against this since I have something to gain by this, you know, or we have something to gain by this? First of all, I guess let's go ahead and just discuss what's positive about it. The reality speaking, you and I on a budget of less than, $50 were able to do this?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to say $50 because we didn't buy a whole lot of equipment.
And I think that even brings into account, you know, internet connections, you know, like the cell phone bills paid, things like that.
Sure, and the fractions of those times, you know, prorated out.
Right.
$50. The same, and the potential audience we have is billions, millions, if not billions of people. To have the same capability even 30 years ago, 40 years ago,
would require a bank loan.
Yeah, a bank loan and a business. You know, you had to be a radio station at minimum. Then,
right.
Or even radio's regional to a large degree. You had to be syndicated to do this.
Right.
You know, and that's amazing. And it's not just, you know, us doing this podcast, but people just being able to voice their own opinions about things, regardless of their experience or their, you know, qualifications, I should say. You can weigh in, you know, on any topic. Twitter is nothing more than people just weighing in and under, well, it's not 144 characters anymore. It's whatever the limit is, you know, on just any topic. And you can slap a hashtag on it and contribute to that conversation. And it's led to people bringing the average person into the conversation more. Like back in the day, if you wanted to know what was going on politically in your town even, you had to go down to the city hall or the schoolhouse on a Friday night and go to the town hall meeting and figure out what's going on and what decisions are being discussed. Now, not only do you get that brought to you from the internet, you can then contribute back through the internet. Now, I'll let you go and say, is there anything positive that you want to bring about that before I get pessimistic?
Politically, I think that that's very important that small voices are amplified in this way as well. because the best way to hold down a population, if you were going to, is to just suppress them. You can suppress the rebellion if they can't talk to one another. With the internet, there is no way to stop that, realistically. To stop people from using the internet to do that would take immense amount of resources. Good luck getting the public to fund that, to fund the resistance against their own uprising. Come on.
And a realistic example was during the Arab Spring in Egypt, when I forget the name of the dictator, president, whatever, leadership there, but they cut the internet because people were using the internet to communicate and organize.
Riots in the streets.
Riots in the street.
Within hours, I think.
Right. Well, and not only that, but a new internet was installed, virtually, using cell phones and Twitter, and people outside of that nation linking in and giving people in the nation the ability to immediately reconnect. And it wasn't just that when you remove the internet, that's a catalyst for huge problems because of the dependency people come to be used to with it. But not only that, but it's so easy to just reinstantiate with other people. It's once you give the gift of the internet, it's really hard to take away.
It's Pandora's box. It's open, except that it's good.
Except that it's good, yeah. So, no, I agree. I would agree with that. The only thing I would say is potential negativity, or I'll say this is an unsure. It's middle ground for me.
Sure.
Which is a good segue into our middle ground topics.
Mm-hmm.
This is not so much the fault of the internet as it is the fault of the people who use the internet. You can spread whatever information you want on the internet. You can be as incorrect as you want to be, blatantly false, but there will be someone else on the internet who will think you're serious, take you seriously, and even potentially believe you. And that's
the definition of Poe's law.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's one of the problems is I can see. And again, I will attribute the fault to the individual. You're responsible for what you believe. Okay? I believe that. I assert that. I think you would agree with me. You're responsible for your beliefs.
To one degree or another. I have some exceptions.
Fair enough. But in general sense, for an adult, you're a majority responsible for your beliefs.
Right.
So if you go on the internet and you choose to believe something and then you act from that belief, part of the responsibility is on you for having believed it in the first place. Mm-hmm. And so with the internet and with the human desire to find people that just agree with them, which leads back into echo chambers, things of that nature.
You need look no farther than the Flat Earth Society.
There you go.
And their presence on the web.
And not only in the web, but now in reality. They hold conventions, my dude.
Wow.
In the real world. Conventions. Not one. Conventions.
Because these people who were once so spread out that they were thought not to exist found a way to find each other, to find one another, and now they can organize such events.
Right. Which on one side of that, it's like, well, at least they have each other. But on the downside is, because we're human beings, the more people we see join a opinion, it gains legitimacy in numbers. I don't know why that is.
Reason.
For some reason. Tribalism in human nature. So that's, I guess, what one of the small problems is. Yeah, you may have a small voice, but if your small voice is spouting some real shit, you can actually grow that voice and it become problematic in a way that it never would have been, because the people around you would not have tolerated it in the first place. And just through social norms, that would have been repressed down to a more realistic.
I guess you could say that it's power, just like any other kind of power.
Right.
And it can be used for good or for bad.
Exactly, because good things can come about too. Like, you could have an idea that if the people around you thought was a bad idea, but it actually turned out to be much, much better than
Galileo.
Yeah, there you go.
If we want to use a real glorified example.
Yeah. Hey, was it Galileo or Copernicus?
It was Galileo who was heavily persecuted for it.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe we're not the center of the universe. Well, maybe you just need to get flogged. What?
What? Burn at the stake.
What? Yeah. So that brings us into more of our unsure topics, and we only have a few of these. The first one is the large contribution the internet has made to the resurgence of the prosumer. Now, this is mine that I've contributed.
Yeah, tell us what exactly you mean by that.
Okay, well, a prosumer is a new term, or a newish term.
Now the reason, and I'll tell you what it means. A prosumer is an amateur who purchases equipment with quality or features suitable for professional use, but also is a prospective consumer who is involved in the design, manufacture, development of a product or a service. And then also colloquially, it's known as people who consume content of the internet. This is the web-specific definition. Consume the content and produce content and participate in both sides of the cycle. You're neither primarily a consumer or primarily a producer. You are in most regards both in pretty equal fashion. A good example of this is people like ourselves. If we were to do this on a professional level, or other independent media sources tend to have to consume the media if they get from the internet first before they're able to pump it back out in their own spin. Twitch is another good example of this. People who are consuming one project or one item, like playing a video game and have a consumer relationship there, but are also producing content with that relationship as well. The more classic idea, the most basic one is the idea of the farmer. The classic farmer who has to consume machinery from industry to then produce food, which he then sells to make money, and that's the cyclical nature. But farmers were in equal parts of value produced consumers and producers in a large way. So the internet's allowed for this mainly due to the commoditization of content and just airtime. I mean, the fact that YouTube exists and pays people to put YouTube videos on it because they can strip ads onto it, that pure and simple is a way for you to essentially, do that. And it's also led to you look at the cost of condenser microphones now and the just good enough grade cameras, web cameras, and the amateur studio equipment. You can get amateur studio equipment real cheap on the internet now, and it's because they're targeting this audience of prosumers or people who are trying to contribute to the internet. Now, whether this is good or bad, I'm unsure. And this is why it ties directly over from ourselves, because in a way we could begin to participate as prosumers if we were able to monetize this in such a way. You understand?
I think that I would consider this a positive personally, because one of the things about, let's say that we didn't have this and we went back to the old media, radio and television, where you basically have authorities, for all intents and purposes, who get to speak their minds to everyone who watches, which is basically everyone when the internet doesn't exist yet.
Right.
And so then they direct all the conversations, because everyone's going to talk about, did you see what they said on the news last night?
Yeah.
And so then they're talking about that, and they've already had potentially an opinion fed to them, although the impression I get from people, which might be tainted by nostalgia, is that opinions weren't injected into the news quite as much, but we could see that happening easily. You lose what I had already previously called a positive thing of people being able to raise their voices. If you thought that everyone on the news media was wrong and you had a brilliant idea about how to get past, solve the world's problems, so to speak, well, guess what? You better get a bank loan and start a business and start your own radio station and hope anyone tunes in.
Right. Well, and on the flip side, now, in certain areas, I feel like, okay, no, that's also not entirely true. Another meaning of the word, I've changed my mind. I've decided I will go ahead and say this is a positive thing for a reason I had not thought about until just now. GoFundMes. Now, one of the definitions of prosumer is being a consumer who participates in the design or construction of a product or something to that effect. Never before have you been able to have your personal input into how something is built or a product being developed before GoFundMe. If enough people want something to exist, you can literally donate $1 or $5 a piece and raise a couple $1 million to have something developed and brought to the marketplace. And that mitigates a lot of risk for manufacturers or people who would bring something to market. If you want to know if something's a good idea or not, start a GoFundMe or whatever
if you get money, do it. If you don't waste a whole bunch of money and the bank's time and money for trying it.
And you don't have to take the risk.
Right.
Well, you still have to take the risk, but you can make a much better guess about the risk and even mitigate the risk.
Well, and I think this is why the default behavior on, say, Kickstarter is good, because you don't even get the money unless you reach your goal.
Right.
So no one risks losing their money until after it at least meets the threshold where you said you were going to be able to do it.
Sure. And as a more modern, as a even lesser example, Mass Drop. I bought my headphones through Mass Drop. They essentially just facilitate they will essentially just facilitate manufacturers doing more runs of an already existing item. Hey, if 5,000 people pledge to buy this thing, we can contract this manufacturer to just do another run of 5,000, and you'll get them at this guaranteed price. The manufacturer takes the lower sell price because it's guaranteed. You're going to sell all 5,000. Mass Drop.
Right. Why would you not make something if you knew you were going to sell it?
Right.
Because the big problem with inventory is you're holding on to all this crap and you don't know if anyone's going to buy it. But if you know someone's going to buy it, turn on the machines.
Mm-hmm. And you're paying to hold it. You can kind of cut distributors out in general, because that's all Mass Drop is, a distributor who essentially gets promises. Yeah, gets promises to buy, and they don't actually hold anything. They just ship it as soon as it comes out of the factory. And as the consumer, I get discounts on things that I really want to be made that may have been more expensive because the manufacturer had to take a risk on it. Next one is the healthiest. The internet is the healthiest medium yet for the memes.
Memes. Now, let's talk about memes.
Yes. Which deserve their own video, by the way, at some point, or their own podcast.
Yes. Well, you could dedicate an entire podcast series to memes. Oh my goodness.
So, broad stroke.
Literally, books have been written about it. So, the meme. What's a meme? I feel like a lot of people don't actually know the technical definition of a meme.
I would agree.
They think they know what a meme is, but they don't. So a meme, and you can look up a real definition if you want, but I'll see if I can remember it myself.
Sure.
A meme is basically the unit by which ideas can be quantified. Like if you think something, if you think what goes around comes around, that's a meme. These little ideas you keep in your head, it's a unit of culture.
Yes, that's a pretty good summation. Memes are ideas, behaviors, or styles. That's kind of what they are. Those are the things that are being quantified as memes and just lumped together as one logical unit, I guess you could say. And then more specifically, the behavior of how memes are spread is what makes them interesting. And how you can model memes in a similar fashion to the way you would model the spread of an infection or a germ is very similar, minus the internet. In pre-internet cultures, memes are done this way. So,
well, and indeed, the word meme was invented by a biologist to be a counterpart to the word gene.
Yes.
A meme is to culture as the gene is to a species.
Yeah, I agree. And so, in the more classical sense, the idea of using a toilet is a meme. One of the older memes out there. The idea of maybe not eating feces is a meme in some way. Maybe backed up for other, realistic reasons.
Important reasons, yes.
But, the idea of someone saying and thinking, we shouldn't do this, or we shouldn't be around our dead bodies. Like we bury the dead or we dispose of the dead. We don't just keep them around. Mm-hmm. All memes. But then there's the memes that we all know and love or hate. And that's your Reddit memes, your iFunny memes if you're a real plebe. 9gag, all those. How did you phrase them earlier?
Image macros?
Image macros.
That's the old term.
The old term.
Yeah, where you have some established formula onto which you impose something specific.
Right. And so the internet is a great medium for sharing both of those things. And it's pretty obvious as why. I think this is just an extension of the ultimately just the interconnectivity and the ability of sharing information back from the earliest topic of the internet, what we were talking about. Now, why? And I guess this would lead to the same unsurety or positive impact of memes. In a lot of ways, are just a method by which small voices and large voices alone can communicate. I assert that memes are a means of communication. Can be.
Memes are a method of communication.
Let me give you an example.
Okay.
Let me dig up a classic meme.
I think memes are more like the they're the payload, not the medium. They're what's in the truck. They're not the truck.
Well, you say that. Okay, how about this? Memes are the packaging being carried by the truck that carry a product, but the packaging is specific to the product. Hear me out. The Velociraptor meme. That's a good old meme that I think most people would remember.
Yeah.
Okay. There are only certain ways that meme makes sense in any real form. However, before you even read the text, you already understand what the implied meaning of this is.
This is going to be a philosophical question or paradox or something.
Right, or something that's, falsely philosophical or
right.
whatever. So,
philosophical,
if you might say. So before you even get the punchline, it's already formatted for you in a way. So it allows someone to say something with an enhanced meaning or with a changed meaning. Mm-hmm. And that's what's delicious about memes, is that they operate on multiple levels. So in a way, they're like 4D chess words, like in a way, or images.
To ask someone a paradoxical question is in some ways better by slapping it onto a Velociraptor.
Right. You can. It's what you did before you could just GIF something. GIFs in a lot of ways are more advanced memes. You know.
Well, I guess what makes doing that special is that in addition to raising your paradox, which you found interesting, you've also turned it into a joke.
Yes.
So you get a bonus punchline.
Yep. And it's a thought germ now that can spread hopefully a lot easier because it is also, you add a recognizable, you make it familiar at the same time. Mm-hmm. Because people see meme formats and those are familiar, so they're more readily, able or willing to engage with them. So it is a method by which it is the truck, but it is also in some ways the payload. I think it's a little bit of both.
Well, okay, when I was arguing about that memes are the payload, I was thinking about
in the scope of the internet itself.
Well, in the technical sense, as originally stated by Dawkins.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
A meme is an idea you hold in your head. So when we are communicating about things and trying to change each other's minds about things, we are attempting to transmit memes. They are the payload. That's what we're trying to get places.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I agree. With that sense. So, but both of those, because the internet allows for the free and open sharing of ideas, mostly. Star here. You can have both kinds of memes just flying about the internet, and not only being able to be transmitted, but the evolution of memes is allowed to run multiple different courses, die off because they're not popular, but the ones who are popular are allowed to then fork again, and then the more successful the two, or they will just utterly change into two different thoughts,
they might split, or they might just keep developing and developing, which is where you end up with those memes that have basically become inside jokes.
Yes.
Because they've developed so far that it would require so much explanation to catch you up on it that no one will bother.
Right.
And so it's their little inside joke.
Sure. So it's essentially, I feel like they're as good or as bad as the what you load in them, or what the idea behind the meme is. Ultimately, I will say I tend to lean them towards good because they are a more effective way of communicating, and it unifies communication in a way, especially for netizens or memers, because I can convey a message or a joke really conveniently easy in a meme that takes very little time to generate, and most of the meaning is already there for me. And then the clever part for me is how to change the meme in a way to get my point across and tie it to a deeper, more long-standing tradition of the meaning.
Right.
So, and the next one we have on the unsure impacts is the contributions. I wouldn't say it's the contributions to populism, but I guess the internet makes populism easier. And it's for the same reasons that we've been discussing, too. Because if you look at the definition of what populism is, it's a political party claiming to represent the common people. That's just the Webster's short version. It's also typically framed against the elite, but that's not necessarily true.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's the classic politician-type behavior of, look at me, I'm just an ordinary person like you.
Right. That's the populistic, or populism.
Populist.
Yeah, just populist, not populistic. Yeah. That's just it in its most populist form of, campaigning. Now with the internet, since you can quickly just hear what the average person is like, it's a lot easier to mimic and to directly speak to those people. But not only that, but it allows them to easily communicate back. Like if you're running a political campaign for, like, say, a high office like the presidency, yes, you can go on the campaign trail and meet the average everyday person. But you're not going to...
But why, when you can develop an internet personality which does this for you?
Exactly. Yeah. And then when you speak, and before then, when you were getting interviewed, you're getting interviewed by people that are looked at by the populace, the people who would consider themselves populist, as elites. Like, they're people you see all the time, they're famous or whatever, these newscasters and such. So it allows you to speak, it allows them to bypass that and have what they feel like is a real connection to that person in power, whether that's real or not. That's the other thing about it. When you are emailing, or maybe you're on a forum talking, or like a good idea is a Reddit AMA with the president or my senator or whatever, right? I feel like I just sat down in a room with a bunch of other concerned citizens and talked to that person, whereas in reality, that could possibly have not even been that person, but we take it on faith that it is, or we take it, we just assume that it might be, So, either way, kind of just ties back into what we've been saying about the internet, it's not really at the fault of the internet, it's just allows for people to be more expressive. It raises the bar for it lowers the bar for being exceptional in a way.
I think maybe a broader way of putting it, the internet, I used the phrasing earlier, it amplifies small voices, but really I think it amplifies everything about what makes us humans. That everything about us is amplified. We can be a whole lot better, we can be a whole lot worse, we can be a whole lot funnier. All these things, it just amplifies all of them.
Right. And so I guess that brings us to to our conclusions. And really, there's only, I think, one conclusion that we should even go into is, would we be better off without the internet?
I submit no.
I agree. I strongly agree. Because out of all the things we've listed, more than any, at its best, the internet is done so much good for humanity. And at its most vague, you can say the internet is only just a reflection, or it just maximizes our own attributes as what it is to be human.
It's more human than human.
Right. Metahuman, in a way.
In a way.
So, and that's going to be its whole other thing at some point. But, yeah. So, I feel like at another time we could go more into what we can improve about the internet's interactions with society. But ultimately, I don't think that's something that, even if we could find ways to improve it, or we could conceive of ways we could improve it, I don't think that it would even be feasible, because the internet already has there are more ways to access the internet right now than there are people alive, in the world. When you think about how many computers, phones, terminals type things on which you can get to the internet, there are more of them than there are people. And so I feel like, as I said toward the beginning, the longer we move forward in time, the more the internet will come to be more metahuman. Now that word, it will come to reflect us more. And I guess the only real question then, which I think we'll have to really talk about of its own, is how that feedback loop cycle gets started. Because the more we affect the internet and the more it takes on these human, it begins to embody us as humanity. How does that affect humanity and back again? So, all right, cool.
It's a good open question.
It's a good open question to leave it on. Maybe if you have any ideas, you can comment or send us an email and give us your thoughts on that, because I think that's where we're going to leave it for today. And so I guess that's the internet and society.
And what we had to say about it.
And what we had to say about it.